So far, we have learned how to create a component and how to use the template and template URL properties of the component metadata. Now let's add some style to our component. Angular provides support for styling a component via the component metadata in two ways. Similar to how templates work, we can use either the styles property or the styles URL property. Both take an array of string values, so they are a little different from the template ones. Let's explore them. Let's start with the styles property. In the app.component.ts file, we can add the styles property to the object literal we are passing into our component decorator. This takes an array, so we can use the JavaScript array syntax of the double square braces. In the braces, we can set up our style content via strings. We can leverage backticks just like we did in the template code to be able to write our style content in multiple lines. The content we put in the string is CSS. We have an h1 tag in our template, so let's just go ahead and make it green. Over in the browser, you should notice that our h1 tag has now turned green. We can add any CSS we want in the styles property. We have a p tag here, so let's go ahead and add a class to it, and we'll name it as description. And back in the styles property, let's add a class for description. And then we want to make our description to be bold, so let's add a font weight CSS and make it bold. When we save this file and notice in the browser, we can see that our description is going to change to be bold. Since styles property takes in an array of string values, we can add multiple classes or multiple style strings to this array. So let's try to add another class called title and add some style to our h1 tag again. So I'm going to add a class called title to the h1 tag. And then in the styles property, I'm going to add a comma and then two backticks followed by the class for title. In here, I'm going to give our title a bigger font size. So I'm going to give it a 50 pixel and then save this file. And back in the browser, you should notice that the font of the h1 tag is going to change to a much larger font size, and it should work flawlessly. The other component metadata property is the styles URL property. Like the template URL property, styles URL works with string values that point to a file that contains the style content. But unlike the template URL property, which takes just a single string, the styles URL property takes an array of strings, just like the styles property that we have just seen. So let's grab the CSS styles from our app component here and then put them into a separate file. Angular CLI has already created a separate CSS file for us. It's called the app.component.css file. So let's paste the CSS into this file here. Let's knock out the backticks and the commas and make this a valid CSS. And save this file. And let's go back to our app.component.ts file and change the styles property to the style URL property. Again, it takes in an array, so we don't have to change the square braces, but it's going to take a string, so we are going to need to put the path to the CSS file here, so which would be app.component component.css. And let's save this file. If you notice the browser, you can see that still our styles are all valid and the page gets displayed according to our styles. Now let's go back to our app.component.css file and change the color to red instead and save it. And now our browser should refresh itself and show up our h1 tag in the red color. You might be thinking that do we need to write a separate CSS file for every component that we are going to create? I would say that's the recommended way of doing it. And having a separate CSS file for your components will make it more reusable and independent. If you still have some styles that needs to be global, then you can include them in the styles.css file here and make it part of the index.html file in the header section.